Death is deeply embedded into Game of Thrones. It's been there right from the very beginning and hasn't stopped coming since. Whether it's a major character or a minor player, a hero or a villain, an adult or a child, as the saying goes, all men must die. A lot of times these deaths are utterly tragic, and on occasion the show throws us a bone and gives us something oh so satisfying. Like Joffrey choking at his own wedding or Ramsay being fed to the hounds. But there are also a number of deaths that could have been avoided. Those that you look back upon and see a clear mistake, and that if only they'd done something differently they would have actually lived. Of course, if they had, it wouldn't be Game of Thrones. I'm Josh from Golf Culture, and these are the 10 biggest mistakes that led to Game of Thrones deaths. Number 10. Hunting a White, Thoros and Viserion. Attempting to convince Cersei Lannister of the threat beyond the wall, and at the suggestion of supposed great advisor Tyrion, Jon recruits a bunch of warriors to head out into the far north and capture a White, with the aim of bringing it back alive to show Cersei and have her join the fight against the army of the dead. Things, shockingly, do not go to plan, because this is one of the stupidest ideas in the series' long history of stupid ideas. If the threat of hordes of undead wasn't enough, along with their White Walker commanders, there's also the perilous conditions to try and survive as well. The Eastwatch 7 do admittedly get a little lucky in that only one of them actually dies, and it's the least known member, Thoros. As the rest of the group realise the severity of the situation, they get Gendry to send for help, bringing Daenerys out of Dragonstone and beyond the wall herself, where the Night King lies in wait and kills one of her dragons, Viserion. All of which could have been avoided if they hadn't, gone to capture a White in the first place. Idiots! Number 9. Bran going solo. Hodor, also Summer, Leaf, and the Three-Eyed Raven. Bran has been going on some trips to the past with the Three-Eyed Raven, but the Stark boy is getting too much of a taste for them. As the Raven warns him, if you stay too long, you'll drown. This leads to a frustrated Bran, tired of sitting in a tree and waiting to go into visions whenever the Three-Eyed Raven dictates, deciding to go off on one by himself despite the rather obvious and stark, pun only slightly intended, dangers it presents. This vision leads him to the Army of the Dead, where the Night King is able to touch and mark him, breaking the magic protecting the Three-Eyed Raven's cave and giving away its location. With the little turd essentially serving as a homing beacon for the White Walkers, it's not long before the Night King and his icy cohorts are upon the Weirwood Tree. Bran and Meera are able to escape, but there's a trail of bodies behind them, with Leaf, Summer, and most devastatingly Hodor, with a time loop shock thrown in for good measure, all dying to help him get away. The Night King, meanwhile, is able to confront and quite easily kill the Three-Eyed Raven, with Bran now taking on the mantle. Number 8. Burning his daughter, Stannis Baratheon. With winter beginning to arrive and the snow threatening to derail his attack on Winterfell before he's even reached the castle, Stannis Baratheon, at the suggestion of Melisandre, decides to turn once again to the power of King's Blood. And since he believes himself the king, there is no one with more King's Blood than his own daughter Shireen. Despite her sweetness, innocence, and the fact that she is A, a child, and B, his daughter, Stannis has her burned at the stake, believing this will clear the snow and allow him to march to victory over the Boltons. Shireen's sacrifice may have cleared the snow, but it cost Stannis his army. Half of his soldiers, including all of his sellswords, deserted him. Selyse killed herself, and Melisandre fled, leaving Stannis no choice but to wearily struggle on to Winterfell with far too few men to have any chance in battle, especially when the Boltons then come to meet them in the field, destroying what's left of his forces. Number 7. Trying to pit the Starks against each other, Littlefinger. Season 7's Winterfell story was, well, it wasn't great. After years of wanting the Starks to be reunited, we finally had Arya, Sansa, and what had become of Bran all back at Winterfell. But with the caveat that Littlefinger was there too, still attempting to pull the strings. Not content with whispering in Sansa's ear about Jon, he also tried to pit sister against sister. These are the kind of games Littlefinger has long loved to play, but with Bran as the Three-Eyed Raven and the Starks ultimately knowing they're stronger together, it ended up with his death, even though he didn't realise it was happening until it was happening. With Arya seemingly being brought to trial, Littlefinger stands smugly to one side, pleased with how well his plan has worked out, and in removing Arya, furthering his own influence over Sansa and thus the North as a whole. It's at that moment though when we hear Sansa say Lord Baelish and the copper penny finally drops. the Starks have conspired against him, not the other way around, and despite his pleas, he has his throat cut by Sansa's executioner, Arya herself. Number 6. Refusing to follow her command, Janos Slynt. The Night Watch was full of people who didn't like Jon Snow, but for the most part he was still recognised as the Lord Commander and respected as such, until his death, of course. Except, that is, for Janos Slynt, one of the slimiest men to ever walk the wall. With Jon in charge, he begins to delegate and orders Slynt to command the castle at Greyguard and man it the best he can. Considering this as an insult, Slynt cuts off the Lord Commander, refuses his order and tells him to stick it up his bastard ass. It's a move so disrespectful and so misjudged that not even Alistair Thorne looks to defend him. Jon has Janos Slynt taken outside and his head placed upon the chopping block, with the former Lord Commander of the City Watch at first believing this to be nothing more than a scare tactic. When he realizes the truth and that he has made a grave mistake, he attempts to beg for his life, but to no avail. Taking the lesson from his father, Jon, who passed the sentence, also swings the sword and takes off Slynt's head. Number 5. Turning his back on Jon, Karl Tanner. Karl Tanner may have been a frickin' legend who hadn't lost a fight since he was 9 years old, but that didn't stop him from making one of the most basic errors possible when Jon Snow went to Craster's Keep to deal with the mutineers. Although evenly matched, Tanner was able to get the upper hand on Jon in their duel, thanks to a combination of his fighting dirty and Jon's sword being a hindrance in such an enclosed space. That's when one of Craster's wives stabs him in the shoulder, and despite not being seriously injured, he turns around to deal with her, and thus turns his back to a still living Jon Snow, who then drives Longclaw straight through the back of his head. Not turning your back on your opponent when he is both living and has a sword right next to him should surely be fighting 101, and something that a person as experienced as Tanner should well know. Number 4. Splitting the Baratheon forces, Renly Baratheon. With the discovery that Cersei's children are born of incest rather than being Robert's true-born offspring, Ned Stark supports Stannis' claim to the Iron Throne upon Robert's death, since their illegitimacy makes him the rightful ruler. Renly at this point is at worst fourth in line, and at best second behind his elder brother Stannis. Rather than support his brother, thus uniting the Baratheon forces, which, together, would have been near unstoppable, he decides to give in to his ego and make a play for the Iron Throne himself. Renly's decision means neither he nor Stannis are quite as strong as they should be, since armies and loyalties have been divided, and it creates a deep rift between the two brothers. With Stannis having the support of Melisandre, Renly is then killed by the shadow assassin baby she gives birth to, one that has Stannis' face, thus ending his own part in the War of the Five Kings very early on. If he'd backed Stannis, then there's a good chance the Baratheons would have secured the Iron Throne, and then he could have made a play for power. Number 3. Freeing Jaime Lannister, Catelyn and Robb Stark, and a number of their supporters. There were a number of mistakes on the path to the Red Wedding. In Season 3, Robb decides that with all other options spent, he must once more ask the Frey army for their help, this time to align with him in his efforts to take Casterly Rock, leading to a new marriage pact that culminates with the Red Wedding. If he hadn't trusted the Freys, it wouldn't have happened. But he only needed the Freys because he lost the Karstark, something that happened after executing Rickard, which itself came from ignoring his mother's counsel, but also losing support over marrying Talisa. Marrying Talisa was also a mistake, and again he ignored his mother's counsel on that, because she had freed Jaime Lannister. While Catelyn's intentions were understandable in freeing the Kingslayer, it destroyed the trust between her and Robb, leading to bad decision after bad decision. And seriously, do we really need to go through this outcome again? Doors close, the music shifts, the blood flows, and the Lannisters send their regards, and we all cry. Number 2, not finishing the job, Oberyn Martell. You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children. Oberyn Martell volunteered as Tyrion's champion in the Imp's trial by combat against the Mountain, a decision that seemed almost suicidal until you realised just how good a fighter Oberyn was. Faster, more skillful, and with a burning desire for vengeance, the Viper got the upper hand in one of the show's greatest ever fight scenes, and looked to have the Mountain defeated. He was on the floor, pretty much done for, and all it needed was a finishing blow, which would have been so easy. Instead, Oberyn kept on the Mountain, shouting the opening line at him until he admitted it. On and on it went, giving the Mountain time to recover, and when he did, he swept the Viper's legs as he made yet another lap of his body, got on top of him and squeezed his head until it exploded. It's one of, if not the, most traumatic viewing experience in the show's horrible history. Number 1. Arresting Tyrion / trusting Littlefinger / meeting with Cersei, Ned Stark, and many others. Where to even begin with this one? Ned and Catelyn are both superb characters and loving parents, but they really should have stayed in the north, because the political games further south really didn't suit them. Catelyn makes the mistake of arresting Tyrion, based upon the word of Littlefinger and little else, which leads to Ned shouldering the responsibility for it to protect his wife. He then, stupidly, also trusts Littlefinger, which is something you never, ever, ever should do, who, unsurprisingly, sells him out. Perhaps the most egregious mistake, though, is that with the information about Cersei's children, he doesn't go to Robert, but to the Queen herself, thinking he can convince her to leave King's Landing. All of this leads to the death that put Game of Thrones on the map. Ned is thrown into the Black Cells for treason, and while it initially looks as though he may have a way out by taking the Black instead, Joffrey ensures that he pays the ultimate price for his supposed crimes. Game of Thrones would never be the same ever again. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Would these deaths have been avoided without these mistakes? And which ones have I missed off here? While you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to Got Culture and What Culture for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't know, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.